Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, the Delaware Update. At this time, I would like to go ahead and introduce one of our speakers today, Dan Lias. He's with CT UCC Business Consultant. Thank you, and welcome, Dan.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you, everyone, for attending today on this beautiful Thursday. As was stated, my name is Dan Lias. I'm the Transactional Business Consultant for the Midwest region for CT, so thank you so much. Today's presentation is approximately about an hour long, talking about the updates and things related to Delaware corporate law. And we are very honored to have our expert on that field, Alan Chatura, who's been with CT for, well, longer than I've been at CT, and I've been here 8 years. I can't remember exactly how long Alan's been here, but Alan is, many of you know him already through prior webinars and kind of being our all-around guru. So without further ado, I turn this over to Alan, and if you have any questions, certainly feel free to ask them during the presentation. So thank you so much, guys.
Thanks so much for joining. This is Alan Chatura, as Dan mentioned. I am based in CT's Wilmington, Delaware office, and our goal today is to take you through the Delaware update. There's been a lot of changes over the last few months, and specifically the last 2 weeks. Many of these went live just 2 days ago. So we want to make sure that you are as up-to-date as possible. We have a reasonably large group today, so we encourage you to type in all of your questions, and we'll do our best to either get through them on the webinar today or take care of them after the fact so that you have all the information that you need to when you walk away. Our agenda today is we're going to do a quick review of 2016 in Delaware, talk about some of the trends and some of the changes that we've seen, go through the updates, both the most important as well as the most recent, touch base on annual reports and franchise taxes because there have been so many changes in regards to these, and then anytime we have for questions, we will utilize. There are a few items that you can download that may be helpful to you in regards to following the PowerPoint and also following up afterwards. So make sure that you take access and download those items. So 2016 in Delaware.
All right, Alan, I'll take the first polling question here. Remember, you have to answer the polling question to obtain CLA, and please answer in the pop-up box that is coming to you right now. Do not answer in the Q&A box. And the first question we have today is, what percentage of the Fortune 500 are incorporated in Delaware? And we have results coming up here. I'll give you about 15 seconds, and the choices there, of course, are 95%, 43%, 67%, and 83%. And that is, what percent of the Fortune 500 are incorporated in Delaware? 1, 95%, 2, 43%, 3, 67%, and 4, 83%. All right, I'm going to be closing the poll in just a minute, and I'll be sending the results then to Alan so he can take a look at this. And here we are. Everybody has pretty much answered. All right. And then here comes the results, and rather interesting results, actually, you'll see. When you get them, Alan, we have almost half the people, 40% at least, going for 95%.
Great. And that's actually the most common answer. Most of our customers and most people around the world believe that Delaware has almost all of the Fortune 500 companies. It's actually surprising to find out for many people that Delaware currently reports that they have 67% of the Fortune 500. It's still a sizable chunk of the Fortune 500, especially when you consider that second place jurisdiction is New York State, and they have a full 4% of the Fortune 500 companies. So really a steep drop-off. But of course, Delaware is looking to grow, so that number may increase in the near future and get us closer and closer to that 95%. Delaware reports that they have about 1.2 million active entities in the state. About 305,000 of those are corporations, and the balance of them are the alternative entities, which include our LLCs, LPs, GPs, statutory trusts, double LPs, triple LPs, and any other letter combination that you can come up with. Delaware reports last year that they formed just over 181,000 new business entities. It was a record-breaking year for Delaware. And if you ever question just how important Delaware is to the overall U.S. economy and to our stock markets. Keep in mind that over the last 10 years, 85% of all the new IPOs, the initial public offerings around the country, have been for Delaware entities and entities incorporated in the state. Last year was a little bit higher. We were actually at just about 89% in the state. And Delaware wanted to advertise that they had roughly one business entity per human in the state. They can now say that they've exceeded that. They have 1.18 business entities per human residing in the state of Delaware. So really, really, really important overall. This chart that you can see now shows the new entity formations that have taken place each and every year. If you can't make out the graph, the light blue at the bottom represents the new corporations. The light green above that represents the new LLCs. The yellow above that represents the new LPs and LLPs. And the red at the very top represents the statutory trusts. What you'll really notice here is that the Delaware new formations very much mirror the overall formation trends across the country, as well as the stock market and the general economy of the U.S. 2007 had been one of the best years on record. We now look back and realize that it was predominantly real estate, and it was a little bit shorter lived than we had hoped. 2009 was one of the worst years on record, about 6,500 new business entities per year, so a real drastic sinking from that 2007 high. But over the last several years, we've had a nice gradual increase each and every year. The better news is that 2016 broke all records, and we saw over 14,000 new business entities each and every month. The even better news is that it was across all types of different markets, all types of different industries, and really a lot of various geographical regions. So it was a pretty good, solid rebound. It did break all records, as I mentioned before. And if we look at 2017, we're currently ahead of where we were in 2016. So theoretically, we should have even better news to report next year. This chart here uses the same color combinations, but really gives us a very different look at Delaware as a whole. What it does is it shows the total entities on file each and every year. And it really highlights the explosive growth in that LLC market that we see. If you think about the fact that in Delaware, corporations have been around since the early 1900s, and LLCs didn't exist until 1992. It wasn't until 2004 that there were more LLCs than there were corporations. And now today what we see is the vast majority of deals are done as LLCs rather than as corporations. For a while, we felt as though the corporations were dwindling just a little bit each and every year. But the last few years, we've seen a slight increase in corporations on file. And the real reason for that is the international deals that are being done. Oftentimes in those deals, the corporation is still the preferred vehicle to utilize. But the most interesting thing about this slide is that we can track this trend back as far as 1929. And we can see that regardless of economic conditions, Delaware has never lost total entities on file from one year to the next. So while it may not have grown very much during certain down times in the market, it's never actually shrunk. And that really highlights the stability of this business within Delaware. So with that, I want to jump to the updates and talk to you about the parts that have changed quite a bit. So we have a bunch of different updates that we'd like to go through. Just to give you a little hint as to what we're looking at, we'll visit all of these. And again, as I mentioned, there are handouts that are attached to the webinar to give you more insight on than what we can cover within the hour. Theoretically, this may help you come up with some additional questions and also have a lot of additional insights as well. So we'll jump to polling question 2, Victor.
All right. We're on to polling question number 2, and I've just sent the polling question out to you. Please answer in the pop-up box that just came up, not the Q&A box. You'll need this for CLE. And question 2 is, are you familiar with House Bill 175? And the answers, of course, there are 1 yes or 2 no. It looks like we're getting a strong preponderance for one of the answers here, you'll see. And again, please enter this in the pop-up box, not the Q&A box. And the question is, are you familiar with House Bill 175? And answer number 1 is yes. Answer number 2 is no. And I think we've come to the end of our poll here. I'm going to close the poll, and I'll push the results over to you, Alan, and you'll be able to see it. And I'm not sure if this is surprising, but we'll see what you see there, of 93% not knowing House Bill number 175.
Great. Well, my goal is that you will know it very well within the next few minutes. So we will change that 6.8% yes to a much higher percentage right now. So House Bill 175 was introduced in Delaware, and it was passed on July the 2nd of this year, and it went into effect for the most part on August 1st, but some portions were retroactive. So the first thing that House Bill 75 did was it actually increased the maximum tax for domestic corporations in Delaware. Previously, they had a maximum tax of $180,000 per year, and this new bill increases that maximum tax to a maximum of $200,000 per year. Even though this bill was signed on July 2nd, its effective date for this portion of it is retroactive back to January 1st of 2017, so it will impact all of the taxes for this year. Anytime that there is an additional tax that is owed, the entity will have a true-up amount. If it's a quarterly company, that true-up amount will be due on their fourth quarter. So that'll be the quarter that's due March the 1st of 2018. So you won't need to worry about any additional payments for the next payment or the payment after that, the September 1st or December 1st payment. Everything will be included in that final tax bill that goes along with your annual report. House Bill 175 also creates a new second-tier maximum tax for specific Delaware corporations. These corporations are entities that are publicly traded on a national securities exchange, and they also have consolidated annual gross revenues equal to or greater than $750 million, or consolidated assets equal to or greater than $750 million. This portion is also retroactive back to January 1st of 2017. What this means for these entities, though, it increases their maximum tax from $180,000 per year to $250,000 per year. But even more so than that, it takes away their ability to recalculate using the assumed par value method. So for these entities, they will not be able to recalculate and reduce their taxes. They will have to pay that full $250,000. We expect there will be about 800 entities in the state that will fall into this category, so not a significant amount, but those that do fall into that category will be notified in December of this year. And again, their true-up payment will be due March the 1st, so instead of making that last payment of $36,000, they'll be making a final payment of $106,000 for their March 1st payment. House Bill 175 also increases the tax rate tiers. So in Delaware, what happens is that you start out with a base tax of $175 per year for up to 5,000 shares of stock. You then have another tier above that for up to 10,000 shares of stock. And then you increase your tiers based upon the numbers of stock. Each tier used to be a $75 difference from one tier to the next. The new rate is $85 per tier after you cross that 10,000 shares of stock threshold. This becomes effective January 1st of 2018, so this portion is not retroactive. And keep in mind that this means that there is no increase in taxes for any entities that have less than 10,000 shares of stock. So the smallest entities in the state will not see any increase whatsoever. For those that use the assumed par value calculation, it actually increases the multiplier that is utilized in the assumed par value method. The old multiplier was the number 350. It has been increased to the multiplier of 400. And again, this portion is effective January 1st, 2018. So this does not kick in for another few months. And it increases the minimum tax owed by the assumed par value method calculation. Previously it was $350 per year. it will increase it to a minimum of $400 per year, effective January 1st of 2018. House Bill 175 goes on to increase the delinquent penalty for annual reports that are not filed on time. Domestic corporations used to have a delinquent penalty of $125 per year. That has been raised to $200 per year, and that is effective January 1st of 2018. But of course, the annual reports aren't due until March 1st of 2018, so it would be nearly impossible to accrue a penalty before the annual report was actually due. For those of you that may be familiar with the global filing service, we do have a price increase on that. It was previously $1,000. It has been increased to $2,500. And that change is effective August 1st of 2017, so that went into effect earlier this week. If you're not familiar with Global Filing Service is a specialty service that Delaware has that allows us to pre-stage a filing with the state, select any future date or future time, and have them hold on to that filing to guarantee us that specific file date and file time. It's typically used in bigger deals and more complex deals, and it allows us to stage that filing without it being public record until the point that it is filed. House Bill 175 does also authorize an increase for fees with the statutory trust entities. However, although the fees are authorized to be increased from $300 per filing to $500 per filing, the state says that they do not have plans to enact that increase at this time. So we do expect that those fees will remain the same, at least for the foreseeable future. Senate Bill 69 was also signed into law. Senate Bill 69, the first thing that it takes care of is it addresses Delaware's blockchain initiative. Delaware is focused on the last year or so on their blockchain initiative of allowing entities to utilize the new technological benefits that are derived from the blockchain. And quite frankly, if you're not familiar with the blockchain, we could spend another 2 or 3 hours just discussing that. But the blockchain is a new electronic method for recording instruments, not only in this industry, but banking and financing and elsewhere. And it really would have some serious advantages in regards to the day-to-day work that we do and that you do. What Delaware did in Senate Bill 69 was they allowed the use of the blockchain. So more or less any time there was a reference to a paper document, a paper ledger, anything that needed to be done in a very specific way, those mentions were either modified or removed, and it allows for the use of the electronic databases and distributed ledger services. You'll notice in the bill it amends sections 151, 202, 219, 224, 232, and 364. It also makes amendments to written consents under section 228. It makes modifications in regards to mergers and consolidations under all of the various corporate merger sections. And it overhauls the Delaware Foreign Corporation Annual Report process. Delaware foreign corporations are not the norm. Almost everyone here is a domestic. But for those few that are foreign corporations, they have a very different due date. They're due June 30th. And up until this point, they had to be filed on paper because they had very specific questions that were quite unique to the foreign corporations. The forms have now been modified to match the Delaware Domestic Corporation Annual Report forms. There's no fee increase whatsoever. And e-filing will not only be available, it will also be strongly encouraged for the 2018 file year. There is talk that e-filing will become mandatory in 2019, so hopefully we can get more and more people familiar with it and comfortable with it on the foreign corps so that when it does become mandatory, everyone's ready to go. We also saw Senate Bills 70, 71, and 72. They do similar items, but for different entity types. So the LLCs, which are obviously the most plentiful, fall under Senate Bill 72. It offers several technical clarifications, which again you can review through the document that is attached to this handout. One of the items that it does of interest is it modifies the use of the word bank in the LLC's name. And it makes it more permissive in the sense that unless there is any harm done by using the word bank, it allows more access to have that in an entity's title. And then it amends Section 18407 related to the delegation of powers for the LLC and the LLC agreement with the members and managers. The LP updates fall under Senate Bill 71. Again, several technical clarifications. Frees up the use of the word bank a little bit more in the LP's name. It modifies Section 17403 related to the delegation of powers, and it modifies Section 17303 related to the safe harbor provisions for those limited partnerships. And then finally, the GP updates fall under Senate Bill 70. Again, same basic items, but several technical clarifications, modification on the use of the word bank, and Section 15401 was amended related to the delegation of powers. And we'll kick to polling question number 3, Victor.
Okay, we're on to polling question number 3 here, and remember we have to answer these questions in the pop-up box that has come up. Question 3 is, benefit corporations are for-profit corporations. Is this a true statement, 1, or is this a false statement? Again, please enter this for CLE credit. You'll need to answer all the questions today. Enter it in the pop-up box and not the Q&A box. And the question number 3 is, benefit corporations are for-profit. Benefit corporations are for-profit corporations. Is this a true statement or a false statement? I'm going to be closing the poll in about 5 to 6 more seconds. Give some last-minute stragglers time to get in there. And here we are. We're closing the poll. And the results are coming your way, Alan. And it looks pretty much like it's a split.
Very interesting. Great. So about 54% are answering true and about 45% are answering false. So in Delaware, the correct answer is that the benefit corporations are for-profit corporations. So true would be the correct answer on that one. Benefit corporations in Delaware are not exceptionally new, but they have actually picked up quite a bit of additional steam over the last year and a half. So I just always want to make sure that everyone is aware of them. It was Senate Bill 47 that went into effect in 2013 that authorized the benefit corporations in Delaware, but we've had several changes to the laws since then. So as always, benefit corporations in Delaware must state a public benefit purpose. Benefit corporations are for-profit entities, but the designation as a benefit corporation changes the fiduciary duties of the directors. And what that means is that they must balance the economic interests with the public benefit purpose. At first, we saw lots of benefit corporations that were formed because of the fact that they were going after socially conscious investment dollars. And more we've seen benefit corporations formed for a various number of reasons, some including that seeking of the socially conscious investment dollars, but also some where really they wanted to make sure that they had access to that public beneficial purpose anytime there was any question of the duties of the directors. These entities can be formed or amended within the state. They can also be converted or merged from non-Delaware jurisdictions. A nice piece of the Delaware law is that the beneficial purpose will not be policed. The state's stance is that it simply cannot be obscene or hateful. Existing corporations currently need a 66% shareholder vote to become a benefit corporation. In the old days, that was as high as 90%, but it was quickly reduced down to 66%. In Delaware, there is no benefit director that is specifically required. Delaware's theory is that all directors are equally responsible, and therefore everyone is inherently a benefit director. And then finally, in Delaware, there is no public reporting required. In most other jurisdictions, there is an annual or biennial report that must be completed to notify the public of how you did against your socially beneficial purpose. Delaware does not require such a report and feels that doing that report could actually give away some of the trade secrets of the entity. Another item that's still fairly new to Delaware that most people have become aware of, but not everyone, is a certificate of validation. These certificates of validation went into effect April 1st of 2014. And really the best way that I can explain a validation is to say that it's more or less a certificate of correction on steroids. The difference is that a certificate of correction corrects an inaccuracy or defect that was caused in a previously filed document. A validation goes a step further, and it corrects an inaccuracy or defect that was caused by failure to file a document. Its official name is the Ratification of Defective Corporate Acts and Stock Errors, falls under Section 204 of the Corporate Law, and the validations currently only apply to Delaware corporations. It's not a cheap filing to do. It's a $2,500 base filing fee plus any tax increase that would be levied based upon the change that's being made. These documents truly are filed and put retroactively onto the entity's records in order to correct errors that may exist out there. The most common error that we see that's corrected by a validation is a stock error. So for instance, let's say we had a corporation that was formed in 2010. They authorized 10,000 shares of stock. In 2012, they somehow issued 20,000 shares of stock. And in 2017, they decided that they wanted to merge with someone or do an IPO or do something else. And they looked at their paperwork and realized just how many issues they actually had. They could go back and file a certificate of validation to correct their corporate record. There are 3 dates that are noted on the document itself. There's a file date, an effective date, and the Corporate Act effective date, which is that retroactive date that would happen. Tax certificates. Tax certificates are very different from good standing certificates in the state of Delaware. Tax certificates are issued by the Division of Revenue rather than by the Division of Corporations. Effective April 17th of 2017, there is a new requirement on the tax certificates in the sense that a new form is required. Previously, we just needed the entity's FEIN in order to make sure that we had the correct entity. But the Division of Revenue is now requiring that there be an actual form completed. The FEIN is still required. If you don't have that form, we can very easily get that for you, but it will be required or they will not allow us to obtain that document. With UCCs, there have not been major legislative updates, but there have been a lot of changes both in pricing as well as in policy. So one of the big policy changes was regarding the way that UCCs were filed. In order to manage Delaware's workflow, the mandatory e-filing change went into effect December 1st of 2015. And what that says is that you can no longer send a paper filing for UCC directly to the state of Delaware. You can either go online, whether through our website, through the state's website, or through anyone else's, and file it yourself by doing data entry. Or if you opt to do a paper form, you have to send it to your registered agent for filing. What that's allowed the state to do is really keep up to date in terms of the number of filings and in terms of the currency of those UCC filings, because there's less data entry that the state is doing, and quite frankly, it removes a lot of the steps from their workflow. That did go into effect December of 2015, and it has drastically cut down on the number of days that it takes to get a filing accomplished, which then gives us much more accurate and much more current UCC search results. This year, as part of House Bill 175, there were a few UCC price increases as well. We saw the online UCC filing fee increased from $30 to $50 effective August 1st, so just a few days ago. The legislation actually permits an increase of up to $100, but at this time the state is choosing to only enact an increase up to $50. Additionally, the same legislation allows paper UCC filings that go through your registered agent to be increased from $100 to $125. So although that portion of the legislation was signed into law and was allowed, it is not planning to be enacted at this point. So I'm sure at a future date we will see those amounts increase, but I wouldn't expect to see them at any point during 2017. Annual reports and franchise taxes, tremendous amounts of changes with them, and I'll toss it over to Victor for polling question number 4.
Okay, we're up to polling question number 4, and here it comes to you. Enter in the pop-up box, and the question is, are you responsible for filing annual franchise taxes? Yes, you are, number 1. No, you are not, number 2. And number 3, you're not sure what an annual franchise tax is. All right, and again, please enter in the pop-up box, not the Q&A box, and you'll need this for CLE credit. And the question is, are you responsible for filing annual franchise taxes? And again, number 1 is yes, you are. 2, no, you are not. And 3, you're really not sure what an annual franchise tax is. I'll give about 5 more seconds here, and then we'll close the poll and push the results. We can all find out how we feel about this, or where we stand with this, I should say. And here we are. Here comes the results. And we have a kind of a 2/3 split here. Yes, most 2/3 of you do, and 1/3 of you don't. All
Great.
right, Alan.
Wonderful. So 2/3 of you will have changes this year. 1/3 of you should be thankful that you don't have to do these. And for the 2% that aren't familiar, we'll get you real familiar real fast. So with our Delaware domestic corporations, there is a requirement on or before March the 1st that annual taxes must be paid and an annual franchise tax report must be filed. Now, Delaware does celebrate March the 1st every year on March the 1st, so no matter what day of the week that date falls, that is the true due date. Sometimes people have confusion that there might be a grace period if it falls on the weekend, and that is not the policy in Delaware. It also doesn't matter about postmarks or delivery dates or anything like that. March the 1st is the date that everything needs to be paid and filed within their system. If you do not file your report and pay your taxes for 2 consecutive years, your Delaware domestic entity will lose its good standing status. Now, there are 2 methods provided for calculating your tax. There's what's called the authorized shares method, and the authorized shares method is the default method. It says that if you have X number of shares, you pay X amount of tax, and it is all based upon the number of shares of stock that you have. There is also the option of utilizing the assumed par value method. And the assumed par value method runs through a variety of calculations. I've actually included the worksheet as one of your downloads. You need to have the number of shares that are authorized as well as the number of shares that are issued. You need to have the par value of the shares, and you need to have the entity's total gross assets that you would report to the federal government, your Schedule L for your tax return. All of those get thrown into a fancy calculation, and it gives you a different tax amount. The lesser of the 2 taxes is payable. The minimum for the authorized shares default method is $175 per year. The new minimum for the assumed par value method is $400 per year. Your maximum tax for both is $200,000 per year, unless you are one of those new Tier 2 entities that have the maximum of $250,000 per year. Now keep in mind that if you are one of those $250,000 entities, you cannot use the recalculated method. But if you're a $200,000 entity or anything below that, you can use either methodology just to see which one makes your tax amount better. Keep in mind that if you owe $400 or less, it's not really worth recalculating because you won't save any money. The other thing that I'll always point out is that the assumed par value method does require that information off of your federal tax return. So some entities may not have that information ready on or before March 1st. We would always recommend that in that case you go ahead and file. You could use the authorized shares method, And the state gives you up to 1 year to go back and amend your annual report for free should you find new information or feel as though the numbers would work better on the other method. You can go back and amend that report and either apply for a refund of what you might be owed or apply it towards next year's taxes, whichever works better. Keep in mind that if you do not pay on or before March the 1st, you will be assessed a penalty. The penalty has increased to $200 per year. You will then be assessed interest. Interest is 18% per year, which is added and compounded on a monthly basis. So that does add up pretty quickly on the folks that owe a significant amount of money. We then have the question of the quarterly companies. Any entity that owes more than $5,000 actually is a quarterly entity, which means that they don't have one tax payment, they have 4 tax payments throughout the year. Instead of just having that March 1st deadline, they have a March 1st, a June 1st, a September 1st, and a December 1st, which gives them 4 opportunities to accrue interest should they not stay up to date with those payments. If you're really curious, the first payment amounts to 40% of the prior year's tax, and then each payment after that amounts to 20% of the prior year's tax, and the final payment does include their annual report filing itself. If you are one of the entities that has opted to utilize no par stock in your structure, keep in mind that no par stock does not allow you to recalculate using that assumed par value method. So in that case, you will have to use the authorized shares method. There's not a way to recalculate. We jump over to our other Delaware entities. So our LLCs, LPs, and GPs simply pay a flat annual tax. It's due on or before June the 1st of each year. Again, June the 1st is the deadline, no matter which day of the week that falls on. So if it's a Saturday, it's still due on Saturday, June the 1st. Keep in mind that they pay a flat fee of $300 per year, and the legislation this year did not increase any of the taxes for LLCs, LPs, or GPs. They'll continue to pay the flat rate that they have paid for the last several years. We do have a question that just came through. E-filing, it asks, please clarify, e-filing required unless through registered agent, in which case it should be paper. So for the Delaware domestic entities, the law does require that all of the annual reports are e-filed. There are some instances where we may have to do a paper filing, especially if we're, let's say, doing a validation, or we're doing something where it's very, very tricky, and we have a lot of back taxes that need to be calculated. We're trying to dissolve in a very complex deal, and so we have a lot of future taxes that we're trying to estimate. But for the most part, the e-filing is mandatory with the Delaware domestic corporations. It is required, and we really do hold to that in the sense that Delaware does not want the paper returns. For the LLCs, LPs, and GPs, the e-filing is definitely the recommended version, but because there is no annual report whatsoever, the e-filing is not required. For our foreign corporations, as I mentioned before, they've always had to do a paper report. However, the paper report will be converted into an electronic report in 2018. They will be recommended and strongly encouraged to be done by e-filing, but it won't be until 2019 that we will actually see the requirement that those must be e-filed. For our double and triple LPs, so those are the limited liability partnerships and the limited liability limited partnerships, they must pay an annual tax and file an annual report. That is also due on or before June the 1st, and that is a fee of $200 per general partner per year. So these entities pay that flat $200 per general partner per year. The real trick to these entities, though, is that these entities are dual existence entities. What that means is that a double LP has an underlying GP and a triple LP has an underlying LP. In order to truly be in good standing, they must pay the underlying GP and LP, and then they must pay and file the overarching double LP or triple LP. So there's two sets of requirements that are actually due for each of these entity types. And that's where we see most of these go wrong. Everybody remembers to take care of the double or triple LP portion, but they often fail and neglect the underlying entity. For these entities, the LLCs, LPs, GPs, double LPs, and triple LPs, they don't get that 2-year window, that grace period that the domestic corporations have. It's actually a much stricter set of policies. In most cases, because they pay significantly less and they certainly report a lot less information. What that means is that they immediately lose their good standing status if they don't pay and file as needed by June the 1st. So obviously they can't get a good standing certificate at that point. It also means that the state will not file documents for the entity. It even more problematically means that the entity may not maintain lawsuits in state courts. So for instance, if they were sued, they wouldn't be able to file a counterclaim until this status issue was corrected. Now the good news is, with the exception of the double and triple LPs, there's no filing necessary to get them back into good standing. They simply need to pay their past due taxes, penalties, and interest, and they are good to go. I've got a few more questions on the franchise tax items. So question is, the authorized shares method with less than 5,000 or 10,000 shares, that fee remains $175 plus the $50 annual report fee. So for those that are 5,000 shares or less, yes, that is correct. The fee will remain at $175 for those entities plus a $50 annual report fee. For entities that have 5,001 shares of stock to 10,000 shares of stock, their tax was $250 for the year, plus the $50 annual report fee. And yes, that also does remain the same. We don't see the increased tax happen until share 10,001. And then instead of being $325, because it was that $75 increase, we actually see it being $335. So that's where that $80 tier pricing kicks in rather than the original $75 tier pricing that we were used to. Of interest, you've got to be over 23,500,000 shares before you hit that full $200,000 tax. The next question that came in, could a company have to pay the annual franchise tax by March 1st and this annual tax on June 1st? So the annual franchise tax on March 1st is actually for corporations. Corporations are due on or before March 1st. June 1st is for the alternative entities. So the same entity would not be responsible for both of those deadlines. If you did have corporations and alternative entities in your portfolio, you may have to be aware of both of the deadlines, but the same entity would not have to do that. The only time a corporation has multiple due dates is when it has more than those 5,000 shares of stock, which means that they would have a payment due March 1st. They then would have another payment due June 1st. They then would have another payment due September 1st. And finally, they would have a payment due on December 1st. So they would have those 4 payments throughout the year. Another question says, so does an LLC need to file an annual report? It doesn't say this on the slide. In Delaware, LLCs, LPs, and GPs do not file an annual report. They simply pay a flat tax each and every year. So they don't have to actually complete a report. All they have to do is either log onto the website and pay their tax, work with the registered agent to get that tax paid, or send in a check to the state. And of course, the state always tries to push everyone towards the electronic processing just so that they don't need to handle it manually. Another question says, will Delaware allow requests for certificates of good standing online to receive the certificate immediately? So Delaware does allow for retrieval of certificates of good standing electronically in, we call it near real time. It tends to be within 5 to 10 minutes. But those are not currently live on Delaware's website. You can actually access them through a few select registered agents' websites, where our websites are connected directly to the Delaware Secretary of State system. And so we are able to have those retrieved in real-time status. What that means is that our system talks directly to their system and pulls an actual certificate of good standing and sends it directly out to you as instructed. So there is a way to get a good standing certificate online immediately. It's near real time, so it's pretty immediate. It's under 10 minutes. The next question that flowed through said, for domestic corporations, does failure to pay franchise tax by the due date immediately result in loss of good standing status? So in Delaware, it's a little bit interesting. There are multiple statuses for the domestic corporations. They don't lose their good standing status in the sense that they cannot keep their name, but they do lose their good standing status in the sense that they can't get a good standing certificate if they don't pay on time. So there's the 2-year window where they continue to maintain exclusive rights to their name, and there is the ability to either pay the past due tax or file the past due report or take care of both of them in order to clarify that before the 2-year time period goes through and that entity goes into a status that we call void. The voided status is where the entity's name is then up for grabs and the entity is truly out of good standing status. But for the sake of getting a good standing certificate and doing business properly, you do want to pay that tax and file that report on or before March 1st so that you don't fall into, we call those statuses O, Q, and U. It says that they're either delinquent with their report, delinquent with taxes, or delinquent with both their report and taxes. The next question that came in said, if an LLC doesn't pay the annual tax, will it be administratively dissolved, and how long before that occurs? So LLCs, as well as the other Delaware entities that are alternative entities, they will lose their good standing status immediately, and after 3 years of not paying the annual fee, they will go into a status that we call void, which means that their name is up for grabs. They're never truly administratively dissolved, though, so the entity will continue to be on the state's record as well as the debt that the entity has accrued. The state is allowed by statute to collect for that or sell that debt to a third-party collection agency. So in regards to actually dissolving the entity and getting out properly, you would want to do an actual cancellation or withdrawal, depending on whether it's domestic or foreign in the state of Delaware, and go from that point. Late fees are still in effect? Absolutely. So the question is, are late fees still in effect? Will there be a penalty and interest on LLCs if they're not paid before June 1st? That is correct. So we will still see a $200 penalty on LLCs, LPs, and GPs, and then interest does accrue at a rate of 18% per year. So on June 1st, these entities owe $300. On June 2nd, these entities owe $507.50. The 515 comes into play after they're more than 1 month delinquent. It's basically a $7.50 interest charge each and every month. What annual report is needed for double and triple LPs? There's actually a legal filing notice that is required for these entities. So we will mail that document to you. Double and triple LPs do have to file their document by paper. Of course, we can use a conformed signature or electronically transmit it, but it is not something that is e-filed. More or less what it is that they report the number of partners that they have for their entity, and that number of partners is reported on the form. It's filed. There is a fee of $200 per general partner per year, and there's a cap on that, so it can go up to $120,000 per year, depending upon the number of partners. So if you do have a double LP or a triple LP, we will send you that form, but if you just are really interested in the form, feel free to type back in the comments box and we could email you a sample of that form without any question. What does true-up amount mean in the sentence, true-up amount due on March 1st? So, for instance, that refers back to the Delaware domestic corporations. Let's say that you are a Delaware domestic corporation that was paying your taxes based upon $180,000 for the year. The tax rate was increased to $200,000 per year, so there's a $20,000 difference there. That $20,000 difference, rather than confusing it and changing all of the payments from here on out, what the state has decided to do is continue charging the payments that have been charged through and keep them at the exact same price. And on the last payment that would be due March the 1st with your annual report, they will add on the additional fee, so that additional $20,000 in this case. That is the true-up payment, which would bring you current with the new increased tax rate and make sure that you were in good shape for that. Of course, you always have the option to voluntarily pay it early, but in most cases, the entity wouldn't want to do that. The next question that came through, if an entity goes into a delinquent status, do taxes, penalties, and interest continue to accrue? The answer is yes. For corporations, they accrue for a total of 2 years, and then the entity goes void, which means that they still owe that debt that they've accrued, but it no longer increases. For the LLCs, LPs, and GPs, they do continue to accrue that interest and those penalties for 3 years. At that point, the entity goes void and the accrual stops, but again, the entity itself still owes that past due tax penalty and interest. So the accrual is 2 years for a corporation, 3 years for an alternative entity, but the debt itself never goes away. I have a question regarding Section 228 in regards to the amendments and mergers and consolidations. So in regards to that, House Bill 175 changes written consents, so Section 228. Section 228 governs the stockholder or member action by consent without a meeting. It was amended to remove the requirement that every written consent bear the signature of the stockholder or the member signing an action by written consent, and to provide that no written consent shall be effective unless consents signed by a sufficient number of holders or members to take action are delivered within 60 days of the first date on which a written consent is so delivered. Formerly, the 60-day period would start on the date the first holder or member signed the consent rather than the date of delivery. The amendment to Section 228 is effective for stockholder and member actions taken by consent, having a record date for purposes of determining the stockholder or member entitled to consent on or after August 1st of 2017. And then in regards to the mergers, the amendments that were enacted by Senate Bill 69 deal with the sections governing mergers and consolidations. The amendments were made to all of those sections, and most of them are technical or clarifying or confirming in nature rather than making substantive changes. Among other changes, the sections were amended to use consistent terminology, such as the word organized with the respect to corporations and formed with the respect to non-corporate entities, the term surviving corporation with respect to a merger, and resulting corporation with respect to a consolidation, and the term foreign corporation to refer to a corporation organized under the laws of any jurisdiction other than Delaware. So there were a few very technical changes to that, but not anything that would really change the typical merger filing that you would actually be filing with the state. What is the current annual report fee for a foreign LLC? For foreign LLCs, LPs, and GPs, there is no annual report. It's simply that franchise tax payment, and both domestic and foreign are the same. So they are a $300 fee per entity per year. Is it correct that corporate taxes are due on March 1st, penalties on March 2nd? However, all entities are due before 6/1, so that penalties are charged on 6/1. So keep in mind, I guess I'll explain this by saying corporations and non-corporations, the alternative entities, are two totally different worlds. So corporations are due March 1st and penalties do hit March 2nd. All the other entities are due June 1st, so penalties are charged on June 2nd. The only exception to that rule is the foreign corporations that are due on June 30th, and those foreign corporations would have their penalty assessed on July 1st. We are about out of time, so I'm going to thank everyone very much for attending, and I'm going to hand it back to Amanda.
Thank you, Alan. We did have some other questions that came in that we didn't have time to answer, so we will make sure that those questions get over to the presenter. We'll go ahead and end the call on our CLE evaluation survey. I'll launch them. There are only 3 short questions, so we'll go ahead and launch them now. Give me 1 second. The first one is, please rate the overall quality of today's webinar, 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. Please rate the overall quality of today's webinar, 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. Go ahead and give you just 1 more second to answer. Still see some answers coming in, so I'll give you 1 more second here. And if you're looking for today's handout slides, you can click on the button on the left-hand side under Files. You'll be able to find a couple different files that the presenters would like us to give you today. Also, today's presentation slides are there. These same slides and presentation handout are also in your reminder email as well. Okay, we'll go ahead and close this one out. And our next one is, please rate the written materials, 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. Please rate the written materials, 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. Please make sure you do answer all these questions in order to receive CLE. If these questions are not answered, unfortunately, we will not be able to grant you CLE. All CLE is offered on the live event, which took place today on August 3rd, 2017 at 1 p.m. Please rate the written materials, 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. Still see some answers coming in, so I'll give you just a few more minutes. Few more seconds. Please rate the written materials, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close this poll. And our last polling question for CLE, please rate today's instructor, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest. After this polling question, this does complete today's webinar. Please remember, you can still ask any questions that you would like us to give to the presenter. We'll get those questions to the presenter, and then we will get out thank you emails with all the answers to the questions that were asked today. Please rate today's instructor, 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. All right, we'll go ahead and close this poll. On behalf of CT, I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. Just a reminder, if you have any last-minute quick questions you'd like to ask, you can go ahead and submit them in the Q&A box, which is in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. And please remember, today's presentation slides, along with other handouts, were also emailed out this morning with the login link. You just have to scroll down to the middle of the email, and you'll see those listed there. You can also click on the files box in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, and all those files will be listed there. Please also note, if you would like to review this webinar on demand, you can review it within 24 to 48 hours using the same link. At this time, that does conclude today's webinar, and we thank you for joining. Have a great day, everyone.
And this concludes today's conference call. You may now disconnect.